This time Stark, and in this video we are looking at the last years of Henry VIII's reign, so the last video of Henry VIII before we look at Edward VI. So the last years of Henry VIII were dominated by rivalries between the Conservative and the Reform factions. Now this was encouraged by the King's decision to not appoint a chief minister to follow Cromwell, and his apparent encouragement of the arguments between the factions. Now this was to do with his egotism and his enjoyment of watching people fight for his attention, and it also created a balanced court between the Conservatives and those who wanted reform. Now in 1540 the Conservatives were very confident, as the 6 Articles had been recently introduced, the greatest enemy Cromwell had been executed, and they had increased their access to the king through the king's marriage to Katherine Parr, who was the Duke of Norfolk's niece. So temporarily, the power also lay with the Conservatives such as Stephen Gardiner and the Duke of Norfolk. However, this was changed when Catherine's infidelities came to light. Now, although Henry had described Katherine Parr as his rose without a thorn, she was 19 whilst Henry was now 49. So it was clear to others that she had other admirers in the court, and in 1541 the king was presented with evidence of her unfaithfulness with Thomas Culpeper. Now, she was beheaded for high treason in February 1542, and this did serious damage for the Conservative group. Now, worse was to come for the Conservatives when they accused Cranmer of Protestant heresy. However, the king rejected these claims and put Cranmer in charge of the investigations of these claims. Now, Henry also married Katherine Parr, who was close to the Seymour family and sympathetic to Protestant reforms. Now, she was influential in the education of Edward and Elizabeth, where they would become firmly in favour of Protestant reforms. Now, the Conservative faction tried to accuse her of treason in 1546, yet Henry rebuked these claims and supported his wife. But as the king's health continued to deteriorate, the political rivalries only intensified, as people like Edward Seymour and Sir William Paget were able to build on their positions at court. Now, Edward Seymour managed to do this by showing his military prowess in Scotland, whilst William Paget became one of Henry VIII's chief advisor. On the other hand, the career of Stephen Gardiner was in decline, as he had been accused of trying to reinstate the Pope as the head of a church, and his role in the plot against Katherine Parr meant that he was pushed out of the circle of royal advisors. So this was the decline of the Conservatives in court. Now this opened the door to the rise of other reformers such as Sir Anthony Denny, and in October 1546 Sir Anthony Denny was made Chief Gentleman of the Privy Chamber, which meant that he tended to Henry's needs and decided whether visitors could visit Henry. He was also able to have access to the dry stamp, and the holder of the dry stamp could make an impression of the royal signature on the paper. So this meant that Seymour and Denny could legalise any document they wanted, and they were able to add provision to Henry's will so that more power was left with the Regency Council, which they would be in. Now, the Conservative group was finally broken apart with the downfall of the Duke of Norfolk, and the arrogance of the Norfolk's son meant that he had openly talked about his family's claim to the throne, whilst putting part of the royal coat of arms of his ancestor Edward I onto his own family emblem. Now, as a result, was executed a week before the death of the king, and Norfolk was only spared the axe because Henry VIII died on the 28th of January 1547 before giving the order. Henry's death was initially kept secret as the leading politicians discussed the transition, and this was led by Edward Seymour, who began to appoint his own Privy Council. Now the succession had basically been managed by the reformers. So now it's useful to look at the state of the Church of England by 1547. As the 6 Articles of 1539 had reintroduced many Catholic beliefs such as transubstantiation, community only being for the laity, and an emphasis on the 7 sacraments. However, even after Cromwell's death, Protestant ideas were not wiped out, as Cranmer remained the Archbishop, Katherine Parr gave the Protestant movement renewed vigour, and the Pope still had no control over England. But ultimately, by Henry's death, England was a Catholic country with some Protestant doctrines and no Pope. So the Catholic doctrines in the country was that the Eucharist was seen mainly Catholic, and this included the belief of transubstantiation. Now, still only the clergy were allowed to receive both the bread and the wine, as lay people only received bread. All the 7 sacraments remained in force. English clergy were required to stay celibate, and many of the processions and events of the Catholic Church remained in England. However, there were still some Protestant doctrines within the country, and these included the fact that although many services were held in Latin, Cranmer had succeeded in introducing some English elements. The Great Bible of 1539 was the authorised English version, which replaced the Latin version. There was much less emphasis on saints, and the laity were forbidden from going on pilgrimages, and the number of saints' days had been reduced to 25. So that shows the state of England at the end of Henry VIII's death. And next video, we will look at Edward VI and his reign. So thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye.